Welcome back, everyone, to the Wedge 52 Gridiron Podcast. I'm your host, Wedge. Today's episode will be the 10-minute report on the Texans. Before we jump in today, please make sure you press that follow button here on Spotify, as well as check out my Instagram page at Wedge52 Gridiron. Take a look at all my other episodes. I've been doing a 10-minute report every single day for the month of July, and will continue that. So check out those, or follow me so you guys can see when your favorite team's 10-minute report releases. If you guys are unfamiliar with the 10-minute report series, that is where I take 20 minutes of study plus my already established knowledge for a 10-minute podcast. With that being said, let's jump into today's episode, the 10-minute report on the Houston Texans. Starting off with the big draft day splashes that the Houston Texans made. They had the number 2 overall pick, and they used that to select quarterback C.J. Stroud out of Ohio State University. Last year, C.J. Stroud had 3,700 passing yards to go with 41 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. All of that on a 66.3% completion percentage. And these are obviously very good numbers for Ohio State. For C.J. Stroud at Ohio State, who obviously is playing bigger schools. A lot of top competitors that they're playing, they were ranked pretty high throughout all of last season. C.J. Stroud is probably him or Bryce Young. I would say I would probably give the edge to C.J. Stroud without doing too much research, just because of his size. But I would say Stroud or Young. I think Stroud, once again, is probably the most NFL ready to be able to transition without the most hiccups in their personal play. But the Houston Texans do not have much to work with, which may cause some struggles for C.J. Stroud in terms of production. But moving on, with the number 3 overall pick, the Houston Texans actually traded the Arizona Cardinals for that pick. The Texans received the number 3 and the number 105 in this year's draft that they already used, obviously. But they did give up their 12th overall pick and 33rd overall pick in the 2023 draft that happened in April, as well as next year's first rounder and third rounder to Arizona. So this is a huge part of this trade. That's probably going to be a top 5 pick again next year, their first rounder. So that's huge for the Texans to have to give that up. But with that pick, the number 3 this year, they drafted Alabama edge rusher Will Anderson Jr., who last year had 51 tackles, 17 of them for a loss, and 10 sacks off the edge. So these are really good numbers. Again, Will Anderson has a lot of stud potential. I think he has capabilities to be, among the top 10 defensive ends within the NFL in a couple of years, But the Texans are definitely relying heavy on both of their picks from this season to pan out well in first-round picks in Stroud and Anderson because of that draft capital that they had to trade in next year's draft. This year's off-season mantra for the Houston Texans seemed to be, signings on a budget. They were picking up a lot of guys who are solid players, but not the elite players that are going to break the bank. It's definitely they're trying to build their team with solid pieces that they're hoping they can develop a little bit further, or can all work together well to propel their team into the future. But starting off with some of those free agent signings, I'm going to talk about the Houston Texans defensive backs group first, which is now joined by free agent signing Jimmy Ward, safety from San Francisco 49ers. Last year, he put up some good, respectable numbers, had 50 tackles, 3 interceptions, and 5 passes defensed. While his numbers on the field are pretty solid. I think a large part of bringing in safety Jimmy Ward was to help, mentor and be a leader, and I guess just take off some of the pressure off of their two now second-year DBs that the Texans have that they drafted last year, in those being Jalen Petrie and Derek Stingley Jr., who both had solid rookie seasons for DBs, but it was apparent throughout the season. They had a lot of ups and downs throughout the year. They struggled in man coverage, so hopefully Jimmy Ward can help, just take off some of that pressure, show him some veteran things, that he's learned. But solid rookie seasons from those two, just looking for more consistency out of them. Jalen Petrie last year, safety, had 147 tackles, 5 interceptions, and 8 passes defensed. So if he can do that and be even a little more consistent, Jalen Petrie can turn into a good player, as well as Derek Stingley Jr., who's the one who really struggled. He's a corner, really struggled in man coverage. But he had 43 tackles, 1 interception, and 5 passes defense last season. Heading over to the offensive side of the ball, to the wide receivers position group, this may be the biggest weakness for the Houston Texans heading into the 2023 season, which is not good to hear if you're going to most likely be starting a rookie quarterback, if not at the beginning of the season, at some point in the season. But at the wide receiver position, they signed 2 free agents, one of which was Robert Woods, played last year in Tennessee. He had 527 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as former Dallas Cowboys wide receiver Noah Brown, who had 555 yards and 3 touchdowns last season. So like I mentioned earlier, signings on a budget, solid players, Robert Woods and Noah Brown. 500 yards and a couple touchdowns out of wide receivers who were not the number one guy on their roster. Like Noah Brown, obviously from Dallas, they have CeeDee Lamb. What's his name? CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup. Noah Brown is maybe number 3. Robert Woods potentially was number 1, but I would say he's probably number 2, just because of his age. And they had a couple rookies like Treylon Burks last season. But other than that, on the roster, they have wide receiver Nico Collins, who last year had 481 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then they should be getting John Mechie III back this season after last season. He missed the entire season as he was dealing with leukemia, but he has since beat that, and last I saw, he plans on playing this season. So congratulations to John Mechie III for that accomplishment. And then the Texans also drafted wide receivers Tank Dell and Xavier Hutchinson. So they're definitely hoping, one of those guys can be solid for them and, provide a little bit of stability at the wide receiver position for a few years, since, Robert Woods is getting up there in age and their wide receiver room is a little bit lackluster at the moment. Just moving on to some of their other free agent signings from this offseason. We'll start off with tight end Dalton Schultz. Last year, he had 577 yards and 5 touchdowns. Schultz has been pretty solid throughout his career, and I believe it was all in Dallas so far. But I believe 2 years ago he had 8 touchdowns, and 3 years ago I think he had 4. So if you're getting 4 or 5 plus touchdowns, 5 to 8 or 900 yards, I think has been his range. That's good production. They got defensive lineman Sheldon Rankings, who last year had 43 tackles, 3 sacks, and 4 tackles for a loss as an interior defensive lineman. They also signed linebacker Denzel Perryman, who last year had 83 tackles, 2 interceptions, 1 sack, and 14 tackles for a loss. Another solid player. Not quite top tier, but, free agent signings on a budget is the Texans' mantra from this offseason, I think. Then they signed running back Devin Singletary, who played last year in Buffalo and had 819 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. He should pair up nicely with last year's rookie running back Dameon Pierce, who was a pretty good, probably, up there with Kenneth Walker and Breece Hall, or at least close behind in terms of production before he got injured. But he had 939 yards and 4 touchdowns in 13 games last year. And then they also signed edge rusher Chase Winovich and quarterback Case Keenum, who potentially could start at least the first couple weeks of the season, but he will definitely be a good mentor to C.J. Stroud and teach him the ropes of the NFL. Case Keenum has been in the league for a while. The most famous play he's been a part of is he was the quarterback on the famous Minneapolis Miracle to Stephon Diggs. So that wraps up our 10-minute report, which leaves me with just the record prediction for the 2023 Houston Texans, where I predict that they will go 3-14. That's all I have for the 10-minute report on the Texans. Thank you all for listening. Again, please check out my other episodes, as well as follow me here and on Instagram at Wedge52Gridiron, and go Ravens.